In this series of videos, I'm going to show you how I modified and restored this record player cabinet. As you can see, it has all the internal components minus the electronic components. This was actually my grandparents'. I have never seen the internal electronic components. By the time I came around, they were using this for storage. So when I moved, that one side got really dinged up, so I'll show you how I addressed that. But other than that, mid-century modern furniture is really solidly built furniture. It's great furniture for someone who wants to rehab or mess around with it, because you already have a solid base. It's not going to fall apart on you. So obviously the first part of this process is going to be taking everything apart. And like I said, the record player and the receiver that came with the unit were long gone at this point. I have my own, but they're not going to fit in what is there. What is there was made a specific size. Newer components don't fit. So basically, I wanted to completely open the inner part of the cabinet, which it looks like that front part is two doors. It's not, it's a solid piece. So I wanted to turn those into doors and have internal shelving. So not only could I use the components I have inside there, but make the space more accessible, versatile. Right now there's a lot of wasted space, even in the original design underneath where the components were. So like I said, mid-century modern furniture is pretty decently built for mass-produced furniture. There's rabbits and dados in this stuff, so taking it apart was not easy. There was a ton of screws in there. Taking all the screws out did not really release a lot of the parts. So as you can see, I didn't want to break it apart, but that's kind of what I ended up doing. So the front, like I said, is a solid panel. There were about 1 million screws in it. I took all them out and it still wasn't budging. I wanted to take that front panel off, cut it in half, and like I said, turn them into doors. The speakers popped out really easy. They still work. I've used this before. I kind of propped my receiver and my record player in the top there. It was really hard to use that way because they didn't really fit. But like I said, the speakers still work. Those were a couple screws that popped right out. So what I decided to do was I was going to take a multi-tool, and you could see there's a rather large reveal that does make them appear to be doors. Anyone that ever came into my apartment thought that they opened from the front. So what I decided to do was take that multi-tool and just cut these out. This will eventually be the reveal for the doors anyway, so I had a little bit of leeway in cutting it, and once I got one side done, the top and the bottom were not connected, so it was just a matter of cutting those two sides, and as you'll see, it pop right out. Now, if you watch the channel, you know I've said mid-century modern furniture is not necessarily my favorite style of furniture, but I got a bunch of pieces from my grandparents, and I like the pieces because they were theirs. I remember them from when I was a kid, but like I said, it wasn't super useful to me the way it was set up. So with that panel popped out, I started sanding this stuff. This furniture is going to be a mixture of species in my experiences. The outer part is some sort of, it looks almost like ash, and then the main cabinet is a walnut, and that is going to be pretty common with a lot of pieces. And the bulk of the cabinet is going to be veneered ply. Most of this is walnut. Like I said, the base is a different species, and there's always a lighter lumber like oak or poplar surrounding a more expensive lumber like walnut. So I kind of sanded this as I go because I don't like sanding. The nice thing about this furniture is usually the finish on here is a stained spray toned lacquer, so it comes off very easily, which is nice. So once I had that panel out, basically as you could see, it was set into that frame, so I'm just going to remove that excess because obviously I want these to open and close. There's a little bit of a lip on the bottom of the cabinet which you can't really see in the video. To cut that, and you can see this plywood they use is really nice. The plies are actually made of hardwood. This green lumber is actually poplar. Older poplar turns a really pretty shade of green. Just another example of how well made some of this stuff is. So I cut off the top and the bottom, like I said, so now it was a little square, and then I could split these two pieces on the radial arm saw. This was extremely nerve-wracking. I could replicate something like this. I didn't want to. I could. but obviously it would kind of take the charm out of it if I was remaking pieces. So messing with these doors was a little scary because I didn't want to have to fix any major mistakes. But luckily everything was made really square, so cutting it on the radial arm saw, that reveal between the doors now, which aren't doors yet, was wide enough for my blade to go in there without taking off a lot of that outer frame. So splitting them in half was pretty easy. So those are my two pieces. Once again, now that they're cut, I could safely put them on the table saw. I really tried to avoid cutting things on the table saw that are wider than they are longer. Just kind of best practice. I will do it, but I try and avoid it. And I could clean up those doors. So like I said, you could see this finish is coming off really easily. It's basically a few passes with the sander. I have 80 grit paper in there. It cleans it up very quickly. I believe they use this toned spray just so that they're using different species of wood. Putting that spray on there with a toner in it is going to make everything look uniform. I don't copy that when I go to finish mine because I like the look of the natural lumber. Stain and toners kind of even out the finish, which is nice, but it hides some of the grain. So I'd been playing around with how I wanted these doors to work, and I kind of got it in my head. I wanted them to be pocket doors, so they would open and then slide away into the cabinet. Now, the hardware for those can be pretty expensive. I didn't want to spend the money on it, but I had these slides, which are made for an extension tabletop, so that the tabletops open in tandem. You can add a leaf in the table. I bought them for a project years ago, ended up not working with them, so I still had them, and I thought I could modify them and turn them into the slides I needed for this project. Spoiler alert, it ends up working, and that saved me a decent amount of money. Now, I have never worked with pocket door hardware before. I've seen them on furniture. The little bit of reading I did, a lot of people said they are a pain. This would have been easier. You'll see why I run into some complications a little bit later, but it really wasn't that bad, and having the hardware was pretty inexpensive. So the basic concept is you have two slides, so those are the slides I'm using from the table slides. I cut them in half, so I have a top and a bottom, and nice enough, these slides I'm using already had a bracket on there, so I could attach a piece of plywood to it. The door is hinged. It sits on that flat piece attached to the slides. You can open the door and slide it into the cabinet. So I spent the time mocking this up because I thought I didn't want to mess with the doors before I got it perfect. I didn't want to cut them or modify them, and it turned out it was wrong. So I mocked this up with 3/4 inch plywood, and I got it working pretty seamlessly. So it was really easy. It was one try. I liked it. The reveal between the door and where the speaker was going to be way too big. I'm using full overlay hinges for this. So what I decided to do was put a dado in my plywood, which would recess those slides, and it would save me about 3/8 of an inch. So it's going to push that door closer to my frame. That was really the only modification I made before I started mocking this up. Just a plain sheet of ply that goes in between the pieces. Now these screws go into the end grain. I don't think I filmed it, but on the back side there is a hole as well, which I also screw into because these little screws are not going to stay in plywood end grain very well. And then once again, I changed it. In this view, you see I'm using 1/2 inch ply to also gain some more space. I end up switching that out. But this is trying it out in the cabinet with the new recessed hardware. And then the problem was, and this was an oversight on my part, the doors were 1.25 inches. They weren't 3/4. So that threw a huge wrench in my plans because when I mounted these, they stuck out too far. Now, a lot of these door hardwares and whatnot are made for 3/4 inch material. So then it became a process of really troubleshooting how to get this to work with these doors. Now, at first I thought I could just take off that extra 1/4 inch, but I couldn't because as you can see, the decorative piece that's in the center frame there is attached to that ply. Those outer frames are 3/4 of an inch on top of that, so I wouldn't be able to use the hinges I'm using if I cut that all off. So basically I just started by pushing back the hinges a little bit. I also propped these hinges up on some washers. They sell spacers that will do this a little cleaner than washers, but I had the washers, so that's what I decided to use. And then I mocked up the doors. I got really close to the edge because, like I said, that plywood is only 5/8 of an inch, and then there's that walnut frame on the outside. So drilling that cup hole was quite nerve-wracking. I didn't want to break through the front. I kind of broke through a little bit on one of the other doors. If I have time, I'll film showing you how I color match this walnut so it fits. And then this mock-up didn't work out terrible. I'm not going to bore you with how I troubleshooted all of this. I'm just going to show you the finished product. I switched back to that 3/4 inch ply in there, and then what I had to do was, you could see I cheated this panel back, and I had to do that also to fit the speaker panel in. And then it was just a matter of pushing that panel forward back a little bit in order to get it. You could see there's a stop in place so that those doors set back, and that's how I got it to work. So far they're working seamlessly. It was a little bit of a pain. You really have to make sure everything's square and perpendicular. I really wish the doors were 3/4 of an inch. I think it would have been a much easier process, but you could see how flat and square everything is. This is fast forwarding to putting it back together just so you could see how it works. But there is the doors and how everything fits. I'm a little impatient, so the finish I have on here is still a little wet, so I'm getting it marked up. But right now, as of today, this is how far I am. A little bit more work to do on it, but so far I'm pretty happy with the process. You could see how now that entire inner compartment is now all utilized space versus before it really wasn't. The top flips open so you could access the record player. You could keep these doors open or closed, and the nice thing about the pocket doors is they don't cover the speakers and they don't stick out far enough to walk into them. And then next week I'll have the second part finishing this up.